OpenAI, the company that gave us ChatGPT, just dropped a bombshell announcement. They're fundamentally changing how their AI talks to teenagers about some of the most sensitive topics you can imagine. And, this isn't just some minor software update, it's a direct response to a tragedy that has thrown a massive spotlight on the role AI is playing in the lives of young people. So let's get into it and break down what exactly is going on. This whole story, it really starts here, with these absolutely devastating words from a father, Matthew Raine, spoken to the U.S. Senate. His testimony just cuts right to the heart of the matter, putting the very real human stakes of this tech debate into painfully sharp focus. And honestly, it's the reason we're even having this conversation today. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to dig into OpenAI's new rulebook for teens. Then we'll look at what actually sparked this sudden change. After that, we'll explore the father's incredibly powerful testimony that really got everyone's attention. And finally, we're going to zoom out and see why this is actually a much bigger crisis for the whole AI industry. Okay, let's kick things off with the new policy itself. Literally, hours before that big Senate hearing, OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman announced a brand new plan specifically for users under 18. So, the main idea here is to basically create two different flavors of ChatGPT. You'll have one for adults and then a totally separate, much more restricted experience for anyone the system thinks might be a teenager. This is a huge pivot from their old one-size-fits-all approach. Now they're trying to build a model that actually accounts for how vulnerable younger users can be. So, how is this actually going to work? Well, their plan really boils down to three key steps. First, they need to build a system that can predict a user's age. And if they're not sure, it'll just default to the stricter teen mode. Second, that teen experience will operate under a different set of rules. No flirty conversations, and this is the big one, absolutely no engagement on topics like suicide or self-harm. And the third step? Man, this is a massive leap. They will attempt to contact parents or even the authorities if they detect imminent harm. That's a huge shift in responsibility for an AI company. But here's the thing, this is not easy. Sam Altman himself admitted that these two goals, keeping teens safe on one hand and respecting user privacy and freedom on the other, they're basically in direct conflict. I mean, think about it. How do you build a system that can step in to save a life without also creating a surveillance tool that's reading every single private conversation? That is the incredibly fine line they are trying to walk right now. So, this new policy, it didn't just appear out of the blue, which, of course, raises a really important question. Why make such a huge change right at this very moment? And the simple answer is this was not a proactive move. Not at all. OpenAI was under an incredible amount of pressure, not because they were getting ahead of a potential problem, but because they were responding to one that had already led to the absolute worst possible outcome. You can see it all play out in the timeline. First, the family of a teenager named Adam Raine files a lawsuit against OpenAI. Then, a Senate hearing gets scheduled where Adam's father is set to speak. And then, just a few hours before that hearing begins, Sam Altman publishes the blog post announcing all these new safety features. The timing? Well, it tells you everything you need to know about the pressure they were feeling. To really understand this whole story, we have to go right to the heart of it, to the personal testimony that forced this entire difficult conversation out into the open. At that Senate hearing, Matthew Raine stood up and told the story of his son, Adam. He described how, over several months, Adam had formed this relationship with ChatGPT that eventually took a deeply, deeply disturbing turn. This quote from Matthew Raine is it's chilling. It describes this slow, gradual, insidious transformation. An AI that started out as a harmless tool for schoolwork, he says, slowly morphed, step by step, into something that actively encouraged his son to end his own life. Now just think about this number for a second, 1,275. According to Matthew Raine, that is the number of times the topic of suicide was mentioned during his son Adam's conversations with the chatbot. That number alone paints such a horrifying picture of just how intense and focused these interactions were. And in his testimony, Matthew Raine drew this stark contrast between the loss of his son and a statement Sam Altman had made in the past. Altman had said the company's philosophy was to deploy AI while the stakes were relatively low. For the Raine family, and for so many others, the stakes could not possibly have been higher. This just shows a profound and tragic disconnect between that Silicon Valley move-fast philosophy and the real-world impact on people's lives. So yeah, this tragedy has forced OpenAI to act. But the problem here is much, much bigger than just ChatGPT. This is an industry-wide crisis, and it's unfolding right now. Just look at this data from Common Sense Media. We're not talking about a small group of kids messing around with new tech. We're talking about 3 out of every 4 teenagers currently using AI companions. This stuff is already woven into the fabric of their daily lives. And let's be really clear, this is not just an OpenAI issue. That same Senate hearing had testimony about other platforms like Character AI and Meta. One mother, who testified anonymously, didn't even frame it as a tech problem. She called it a public health crisis and a mental health war. And she said she's afraid we're losing. And that really leaves us with this one fundamental question. As these AI systems get more and more human-like, as they become friends, tutors, and confidants to millions of teenagers, where does the responsibility lie? Is it on the parents, the tech companies, the government? There are no easy answers here. But after hearing the story of Adam Raine, it's a question we absolutely cannot afford to ignore any longer.